So this is a particularly exciting panel, which is going to be run in two parts. We are going to have first a chat with Representative Ken Buck, Colorado, from the US Congress. He has played a particular role, I have to say, in the US discourse in recent years as a Republican, really being aware of the issues and the problems that are associated with the rise of big digital companies, the implications that this has for democratic discourse in the end. So Ken has also been someone who has been pushing legislation in various forms, and we'll talk about that. And he will be in conversation with Marco Iansiti of Harvard Business School, and then we'll broaden the discussion to the rest of the panel, which contains a combination of lawmakers. We have Attorney General of Texas and enforcers and opinion makers and various other very attractive characters. So let me start with you two. The title of this is Online Harms, AI and Democracy. And Ken, to start with you, you have been really very much at this center stage in the attempt in the US to bring forward some form of regulation of digital that was meaningful. There have been, as we know, multiple attempts to just launch bills. You yourself have been associated with sponsoring important bills. Some have come through, particularly the venue bill, but substantively not much has happened relative to Europe, and we'll talk about it in a moment. But I wanted to start this discussion with your sense for well, we kind of know why, but where is this discussion on regulation potentially going in the US? Is it still very much, who knows, up in the air, it will never happen because lobbying is too great, or what is your sense for where this might go?
First, thank you very much for inviting me and having me. And second, one of the first things I learned in public life was never to speak mid-afternoon because everybody falls asleep. So I hope everyone here has had plenty of caffeine, because it's very difficult to make antitrust interesting without caffeine, much less mid-afternoon. So let me take a step back, if I can, Christina, and just talk about what happened in the last Congress and then where things probably will go. The last Congress was very interesting. We passed 6 antitrust bills from the Judiciary Committee in the House. David Cicilline, absolute superstar. I will miss him. While we are different on 99% of the issues that we face, we had a lot of synergy on antitrust and did a lot of great work together. But those 6 bills did not hit the floor for one very simple reason. We had the votes on the Republican side. We had the votes on the Democrat side. There was great bipartisanship, and there rarely is in this day and age, but there was great bipartisanship. Didn't hit the floor because of Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi. The same happened in the Senate. Great bipartisanship with Senator Klobuchar and Senator Lee. A number of Democrat senators, Republican senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee were moving bills, didn't hit the Senate floor for one very simple reason: Senator Schumer. And it wasn't because we didn't have the better argument. We did have the better argument. And that's why we got such broad bipartisan support. And it wasn't because we didn't have popular support. We did have popular support. The grassroots in America is absolutely in favor of competition, and they feel that there is something, and I'm going to use a phrase from my daughter that I'm looking around the room, and very few of you have the same color hair that I have, but she says, "Dad, it's creepy." So that's her technical term in the antitrust world for lack of competition, and it's just plain creepy. When I go and look for a pair of cowboy boots, and for 3 weeks, every time I turn on my computer, there's an advertisement for a pair of cowboy boots, or I drive by a Ford store after I'm looking for a pickup truck, and they're following me in every way possible, and I'm turning off all those tracking devices. It's just creepy. And so Americans understand that, and they want change. But these companies spent tens of millions of dollars in the political system. They didn't darken my doorway, but they did in a number of areas. They didn't move the sort of rank and file members of the House or Senate, but they certainly moved leadership. Now, I've taken my shot at Democrats. Let me take my shot at Republicans. The current administration with Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan as chairman of the Judiciary Committee will do absolutely nothing. And they'll do nothing, and it's, to me as a Republican, it's a disgrace because we are constantly, I've said it 1,000 times and I've heard it 10,000 times, we want strict constructionists on the bench. We don't want the judiciary making law. We want them interpreting law. And then at the same time, my colleagues, a couple of my colleagues are saying, well, let the marketplace deal with this. We don't need to interfere with Congress. So if you say the courts shouldn't do anything, and if you say the legislative branch shouldn't do anything, what you're saying is we don't want anything to happen. And that comes from a whole lot of money being put into a whole lot of pockets, and that's just plain wrong. Again, they don't win ideologically, they don't win with popular support. They win because they are making such gross amounts of money that they can buy the system. Fortunately, I'm not going to make this a Debbie Downer moment for everybody, but fortunately, there is good news. And the good news is the Texas Attorney General sitting over there. I just want to make clear, if there are any cameras in the room, that he is to the left of me. But it is real important. We were able to pass a bill that empowered the attorney generals to keep cases in their own district. They were always getting moved to the backyard of these big tech companies in Silicon Valley. We were able to make sure that we got some more resources for the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission. So those things, going forward, we hope there is more enforcement activity. Unfortunately, it will be a very big challenge for us to get more done in this Congress, especially with David leaving the U.S. House. There is a chance that we could get 1 or 2 bills done, and everyone's going to say, well, tell us what those 1 or 2 bills are. The one bill that I think is the most, deals with the most egregious conduct is what I call the ad tech bill, and that is to make sure that Google can't control all 3 sides of the digital advertising world, and that's a bill that we will focus on. The other 2 bills are sort of the non-discrimination bill, and it affects a number of these tech companies, or the platform bill that Marsha Blackburn has with Amy Klobuchar. But I think those 2 are the 2 of the bills that may pass if we can do enough of the procedural maneuvering to get those passed. The nice thing about having a 5-vote majority in the U.S. House is leadership knows they need those 5 votes. They didn't have them for the speaker race, and so that took many, many hours. And it was a clear message that we hopefully can get some things done like that.
So you have been concerned about unfair business practices of big tech, but also very prominently about issues of accountability and transparency. And you have a book which is out there as well on the particular effect and the concerns you have around discourse and democratic discourse. And so there's a current case or recent case in front of the Supreme Court on Article 230, which is being debated on responsibility of platforms ultimately. We are all watching Twitter descend with morbid fascination into some sort of chaos. So I know this is a concern of yours, and we'll talk about AI in a second, but just give us again a sense for what the main focus and how do you think this fight against particularly Google, but others too, takes the form of a pro-democracy fight in your mind?
So for me, what convinced me that this was an essential issue is speech. In a democracy, if one company controls 94% of the searches online, that company controls the flow of information. If it controls the flow of information, it has an undue influence on elections. And I believe that it had an influence on elections, and I believe that given its morality in how it conducted itself, and I'm talking about Google, I'm not trying to mince words here, in the whole legislative process, that they will continue to act that way and do everything they can to maintain their monopoly. We can't allow that. We have to have competition in the search marketplace, and it is essential that we move in that direction. The same is true with the phone platforms. The same is true with the, since more and more of the world is getting their news through streaming rather than cable and more old-fashioned methods. We need to make sure that there are streaming services and not controlled by just a few companies. So in my view, the democratization issue is the key issue in all of this, and I think it is the issue that really appeals to both sides of the political spectrum the most.
And now there's a new kid on the block in some sense, right? There is AI. We've been also following this very recent surge. And the concern inevitably is that going to make things worse? I know this is something you ask yourself. And immediately in this context, people think, how should we deal with this? So I'd like you to start on this and then pass on to Marco, who is a professor at HBS and somebody who has worked on AI quite closely. But I'd like to see you two take it away a bit.
Sure. So in my view, AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, the whole group has the potential to open up search being the most profitable of what these platforms do. Perhaps Bing is more competitive with Google down the road as a result of AI. Perhaps not. But AI could be, and first of all, let me just say, we can't lose to China when it comes to AI. We can't overregulate and not innovate. At the same time, we can't have a lack of competition and not innovate. China is not a country that shares our values. And as we have seen with Russia recently, and there will be 3 hotspots in the world in the next 3 or 4 years, we cannot allow that to happen. So I think we have to have an eye towards how do we make sure that we support the development of AI in a safe way, and with not that these companies necessarily share our values, but they share our values better than some of the countries that would like to use AI for nefarious purposes. So I think that AI has a lot of potential to do great things in healthcare and so many other areas, but as it pertains to search, we need to make sure that we do have competition with AI so that it is something that helps us in terms of spreading information in the country.
Great comments and really good thoughts. And it's an interesting time to be doing this right now because I feel like we've really had a major moment in the history of technology, in the history of AI specifically. When ChatGPT 3 was introduced November 30th of this year, in a period of about 2 months, it signed on about 100 million users, which is an incredible increase, just mind-blowing increase. And it is really a major change in how AI is structured, how it works, what it does, its potential for both good and bad, right? So the game has just changed, and I think they will remember this time a little bit like maybe how we remembered, when Mark Andreessen introduced Mosaic and back those days in 93 and 94 and Netscape and all of that. It's really going to change the game around AI. Why? Because it's really different. Traditional AI has been set up in a very specific way. So machine learning works on very specific use cases. Like we were talking about agriculture this morning, so one of my favorite ones actually is in agriculture. This was actually done in China, so there's no further comment on that. But basically, it's a system to insure pigs. Apparently, they have a lot of pigs and they need to be insured. And it turns out you can use AI, for example, to do facial recognition on pigs. Very exciting application. And so how do you do that? Well, you get a lot of pig faces and you train the AI, and what the AI can do is basically fulfill that purpose and does that specifically, and it works well, and you can kind of automate the process. Recognizing pigs by humans is hard, and so it's nice that AI does that. So, but machine learning fundamentally is a huge variety of these very narrow use cases that in some ways are a little scary because they can replace what humans do, but typically recognizing pigs is not your ideal job, and so many of these things are not that exciting. Now, generative AI is fundamentally different, right? Because we're talking about general artificial intelligence, and so these algorithms are powerful enough that they can simulate many different things that humans do. And so it's fundamentally, it's almost like a philosophical change, right? And how do you feel about this? To the extent they were getting close on things like the Turing test and stuff like that. These things are pretty human, including the fact that they cheat and they lie and all kinds of things. And it's an interesting moment because, again, it's like, there's a whole new range of things that will change as a function of this. Now, is it going to be, one question, maybe to just tee it up, two more quick points, but one of them is it going to be pro-competitive or not? And that's an interesting question. AI traditionally has all been about data, and do you have the right data, and how much data do you have, and all that. Generative AI is also about data, but all the data that gets ingested by these massive algorithms is public. Pretty much, at least so far. We're ingesting Wikipedia, we're ingesting all these copyrighted things that people are having all kinds of concerns about and things like that. But basically, you're just taking all the stuff that's up on the World Wide Web and sticking it in to train an algorithm, which then is so highly trained that it can solve a broad variety of problems, essentially. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. So data itself is not really a barrier because it's out there. The barrier has shifted over to, in many ways, compute capacity. So it took $1 billion to train ChatGPT 3. That's a lot of compute capacity. And so we're going back to basically almost like a traditional scale barrier, which could concentrate the markets. But it's not going to be the kind of nonlinear network effect-like thing with a winner-take-all outcome. So from that perspective, so it's kind of interesting. So we do have definitely dynamics there. And Christina.
So how do you see a potential regulatory effort in that direction? Where should it be focused, or legislative?
Yeah. So yes, it's an interesting. So part of this is also understanding where this thing is going to go, right? Because we're just at the beginning. We have a clunky browser. Like back in the days of 94 and 95 when you're browsing the web and it was all pretty clunky and messy. This is sort of, ChatGPT right now is powerful, but it's just the beginning. This thing is going to get better by 6 orders of magnitude. Like if you look at sort of how much the technology is going to progress, the hardware behind it, as well as the extent to which the algorithms themselves will progress over time, and the learning curves around all of that. So this thing is going to get a lot better. So right now it's pretty good already. Criticized plenty, but again, the future is going to get interesting. There's going to be 2 levels of this. You're going to have platforms, and you have applications, right? Kind of like a lot of things, a lot of digital things these days. And so there's going to be a few platforms. I believe you're going to have a lot of the traditional players there. Hopefully not too many, but enough. Not too many because we can know who they are and regulate them. And if you want accountability and transparency, that's a good thing to have, because you go in and make sure that these things are being used in a way that is, so from a regulatory perspective, reasonable. On top of that, you're going to have millions of people writing applications of these things, and already this is starting to happen. So half of Y Combinator this year is about generative AI applications, just to give you a sense. So we're talking about already hundreds of companies essentially being started around this, and more going forward.
But surely there is a concern, and I'm going to pass on to Ken and then move on, about, we need to think about an AI gatekeeping problem. I mean, this is not easy, and it is not sounding that reassuring, frankly, Marco.
I am not saying it is. Never said it was a good thing. It's just happened.
I hope, Marco, that I'm not the first person that the AI confuses the facial recognition with a pig.
Yeah, no.
It's undoubtedly going to happen. I just don't want to be that person. But I do think that the really interesting issue is that in order to be successful in AI, you need to have massive computing ability and you need to have a massive database. And there's only a few companies in the world that can create that.
Yeah.
And so we're not really talking about fixing the competition problem. We might be talking about, instead of one, having two or three, but we're not talking about 10 airlines or 20 car makers.
Well, it's interesting, like how many would you like to have, right? So in the sense, because like you're stuck between, on the one hand, you need to have enough so you have a competitive environment. You don't want to have so many so you can't regulate and you can't really have transparency. You don't want to have 1,000 of these, because then it would be a nightmare to figure out all the different things that are going on. And so you're kind of stuck between sort of the national security and making sure that these things are being used in a way that is possible to regulate and something that becomes anti-competitive. And one of the things that will happen is that the barriers to entry will go down. So from the perspective of investment, that's going to come down. Now, the models are going to get more complex, and so it's a moving target, right? But
I still don't find that reassuring. 2 or 3 ain't enough. Let me just shift slightly to your left. And